Yeah, the plan for today is to do a recap of some of the ideas we came up with in the focus week last week. So I'll be going through that, and it's also an opportunity to kind of, I guess, clarify our understanding. So, if there's anything that doesn't sound right or is confusing, we can definitely stop and go over it as we're going through this. If there's time at the end, there's some ideas that Scott and Vivian have been thinking about that could be interesting to discuss. But yeah, we'll see how far we get. Just out of interest, did anyone have a chance to go through the document that I shared, or no worries if not? But
Not yet. Sorry, not
okay,
yet.
no, that's all right.
Yeah,
I just wanted
just
to check
went
how
over
much
the
I'd be
topics that are in
retreading.
there, but not
What's that?
all. Just over the topics in there and not
Yeah,
high
okay, to like
level.
see what was kind of
Yeah.
covered.
I wanted to
So
do it, I just didn't have time.
yeah, no, no worries.
So,
Let me share my screen. So yeah, this is the document I was just referring to. So
it's a
originally we
great title, by the way. How to turn on a switch. It's like it's like, what can
right.
your system do significant? Well, we're still working on figuring out how to turn on a switch.
Basically like a binary toggle in the world. Yeah.
Right, right.
Shouldn't
Um,
it be how to flip a switch?
well, but then I was like, well,
Ah.
it's the rocker. So
Well, if you want to involve causality, you want to turn on a switch, right? Because that's because you want to turn on the light, which means you want to flip this switch.
Yeah,
Forget
well,
it.
yeah,
Let's
we're
keep
not
going.
turning on the light yet, is what I mean. We're just flipping the switch at the moment.
Right,
yeah,
right,
I guess
right.
I
All right,
guess I meant
all
like
right then.
power in the switch, but yeah, fair enough. Um,
Okay.
but anyways, yeah, so just to kind of give you some sense of kind of the structure. So during the week, we kind of wrote these summary notes as we went along for each day, and I've kind of kept the cleaned up versions of those here. But at the top, in the main part, I've kind of tried to summarize these under kind of relevant sections like, yeah, these kind of mechanisms or computations that we talked about, things like the direct motor output and the forward and inverse causal linking, and then where relevant, kind of what connection we think this might relate to in the brain. Because, even though these are always subject to change, I think it does provide some useful kind of grounding, like a mental model, basically, of how these all connect. Um, but what I thought might be the best way to do it, rather than just going through all that text now, is try and talk about it as much as possible in the context of these figures, and then I'll probably miss some of those details. But then with this kind of this structure, this kind of mental model to be able to return to, we can then go through any kind of remaining details, and I'll try and kind of build it up.
That's much that that's much better for me. I mean, the images work so much better than the text.
Right. Yeah.
They're just harder to create.
Right. Right. So, but yeah, for I guess like Tristan and Jeremy, as said, yeah, the problem we were trying to solve is kind of how to flip on a switch, how to or switch on if it's a kind of a more like a rocker switch like this. Um, Basically toggle this on. So what are the computations the columns themselves need to do, and also what needs to happen between the columns to coordinate this to actually happen. And we had a few pieces already for this kind of before this week, like how causal interactions could be learned, and sort of the inverse causal model. But in general, we got kind of more clarity about how this whole system would work. At the same time, I wouldn't say that all the questions are answered. There's still a lot of detail that we kind of want to hash out. Um, but to kind of understand these
Can I have a
figures,
suggest? Can I just have a suggestion in the future when we draw these images? It'd be nice if it was immediately obvious which is a behavioral model, which is a morphology model.
yeah,
I know it says rocking and I just
no, it's a
even
good
yeah
point.
like
Yeah,
that.
so down
Just like
here,
that, just like that. That would be
right?
that's all it requires.
No,
Right.
it's a
I'm
good
just so
suggestion.
I'm not confused here. I'm not confused here. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah, no, no, it's a good point though.
Yeah,
Um,
I usually make the reference frame color different between the two.
Yeah,
Like
but
if
that's
I'm using purple for behavior and blue for morphology, but
yeah,
I
in
guess
but
my
that's
only
not
concern
as
with that is purple kind of already has a meaning, which is
right.
like
This
top-down
this is
connections.
perfect. This is perfect. Even just a B and an M on the top would be sufficient for me. Okay,
Okay.
great.
Um, So yeah, so as these labels now connote, we have these two learning modules in this kind of standard setup where we are learning how to model this switch and how it kind of evolves over time. And we have this morphological model where it can be in these two different kind of states, this on and this off. And we have a behavior model which has learned this kind of movement that can happen with the rocker, where you see kind of small local flow changes happening across its surface. But this isn't specific necessarily to a rocker. This is just anything that's kind of doing this sort of seesaw type movement in a local
So
region
that
of space.
lower small rectangle should also be a morphology model. Is that right? That thing that's
Yes,
labeled
that's also
rocker.
an M
That's
model.
also
Yeah,
right. So this is another example because we don't show all the details and it's smaller. You use like, what is that? Right.
right.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, thanks. And this isn't kind of new stuff from the last week. This is just to kind of build up what we're looking at. But as part of sort of an underlying assumption for how columns would learn this rocker when it's kind of observed, or the switch when it's observed in the world. Maybe I'll put this over here. So this is what they're actually seeing. We would have this child-parent relationship between the behavioral model being learned and the morphological model, where this behavioral model, essentially they're co-located in space. So they have aligned receptive fields. And so as we're moving through the reference frame of the behavioral column, we're also doing a kind of corresponding movement through the reference frame of this morphological model. And then, yeah, as Jeff was pointing out, we also have this morphological model just of the rocker. So as in, what is that? So as in, that's a child object that is just the morphology of this piece itself that can exist within the kind of switch as a whole. And then we
That
kind of,
we haven't walked out all the details of that yet, but like that's like the noticing the staple top moving or something. As soon as you see it rock and move, then you realize that is a separate object on its own. So we're
right,
skipping that step here, but it was assumed that it's learned, and you're only really going to learn that by observing it moving.
right.
So
Yeah,
just
as
I'm
a
just
separate object,
repeating things
right.
we already right.
Yeah, yeah. I might add some notes as we go along. Uh,
I, I could stop interrupting, I suppose. I'm
no, no,
just
I think
reminding.
it's useful. Um,
Is the behavior model only modeling the rocker, not the full switch, or is it modeling the full switch?
I mean, it would only
It's
model the
object
changes.
agnostic.
So if the outside of the switch isn't moving anywhere, then it wouldn't get any input at those locations. So it just
Okay.
gets input at the locations where change is happening.
Right.
So if there
Right.
was
It's
there were
interesting.
changes on the switch as well, it would model that, but it would still be a child of the morphology, right? It would just be where are
It
changes
depends. You know,
happening.
you remember like the stapler had different behaviors on it. You could have the hinge behavior, you could have the base plate behavior. So in this case, there's only one thing that's moving. And so the behavior model will just model that thing that's moving.
I mean, if there was something
Um,
else changing, like for example, when you flip the switch, a little light goes on, like a little LED showing that it's on. I would say that might be a different behavior model that's also linked to the switch model and kind of has a causal connection between the two behaviors. But it
yeah.
right.
probably be a separate behavior
And
model.
in this case, it's a little confusing, Rami, because the rocker is a major part of the entire switch, right? So it's
Mhm.
not, if this rocker was on the side of a lamp, then you could say, oh, there's a rocker at this location on the lamp. But in this case, we're just saying, oh, the large object is just the switch. It's only a little bit bigger than the rocker itself.
Yeah.
But it's the thing that the rocker is rotating relative to. So you'd have to have something the rocker is rotating relative to. In this case, it's just this little back plate, which is pretty small.
Right.
Also interesting, if we have two behaviors that are happening at the same time, how does the behavior model separate those and figure out that this is a different behavior ID that should be like the example that Vivian was giving, a little light at the corner.
I think,
So,
it's a good question. The one answer to that is if these two behaviors are sort of separated on the parent object. They're in different locations. Remember, you had the exploding logo on the cup. Remember that? And so, the different parts of the logo would move. You'd have to track each one of those separately because even though they're moving at the same time and they're coordinated, they're sort of separate locations on the object. And so I think on that situation, you would say, oh, I first have to learn the rotating the icon and then the rotating words, and you have to learn those separately.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
it
know.
feels like maybe the temporal coordination would play a role because
Right,
if there's like let's say a beat that kind of helps you almost anchor them together temporally, then I feel like they'd be more likely be kind of associated, like I don't know, a
right.
pulsing light that at the same time makes a clicking noise or something like that. Whereas if it's if like in that exploding logo example, you're trying to memorize this long sequence where they're moving at different speeds and different directions and all this kind of stuff. Um, it's much harder to kind of associate that as like a single behavior.
But I mean, I think Rami
It's
meant,
all.
how do you know if that they're not the same behavior, like that you have a separate behavior model for the flip, for the
I think.
rocker
Yeah.
rocking, and for the light turning on? And I feel like that's
I. Th-
something where like as an adult, it's pretty clear that you already have a model for light turning on, and so you can just recognize that behavior. But maybe it's something you just kind of disentangle over time because
well,
they
look.
just
Well,
continue
clearly, if the
moving.
light ever went on and off independently of the rocker switch, then they'd be separate behaviors. I do think there's a lot of co-location going on. Imagine I have an object which and there's two switches on it, and the switches are separated by 3 feet, let's say. And if I flip up one switch, the other switch goes down. I flip down the other switch goes up. I think because they're so physically separated, I would first attend to one and I turn the other, and I learn a causal location between them. I wouldn't learn that there's this behavior that includes moving pieces way over here and way over here. Um, it's just they're too far apart, because we need them in the same reference frame. So I think to me, it's like child objects. If I had a mug with a logo in the upper one corner and another logo in the bottom one corner, I would learn that it's probably two child objects as opposed to one child object, even though they always appear at the same time. Um, I don't think it's an important question right now, but it's interesting to think about.
Yeah. In the example of the exploding logo, I think it's also that each part of it is each part of the logo that exploded in a different way. They're like different child objects, or like they're exhibiting different
Right,
primitive
right.
behaviors. One of them is rotating this way, the other is rotating that way. So they have to separate them. Um,
It's like those are separate child objects, so there'd be separate behaviors. Um,
right.
so right. Imagine this when this thing starts moving, it sort of defines a boundary for the thing that's moving, and we take that boundary, we say that's a child object. And if there's another thing that was moving, it had a separate set of boundaries. I wouldn't necessarily bring those two together. They're removed from each other. They're two separate objects, two separate childs, two separate behaviors that can be causally linked. So you know that when this one goes, that one goes, but it's not like one thing. All right, enough of
Yep.
this, I think. Let's
Sorry,
go back
Niels.
to the review.
No, that's all right.
Okay, it's a good question.
So yeah, and so then just to finish the kind of core recap of principles preceding last week. As a reminder, we have the kind of precortical sensory regions, and those are extracting both local edges, morphological features, and local flow changes. The local morphological features are what are building up the morphological models. So that's how we learn, for example, the model of the rocker. The flow changes are the local features that are being learned in the reference frame of the behavioral model. And then we have these hierarchical connections going further up, where, for example, the morphological model and then the behavioral model can be children of this switch morphological model, so that we know their behaviors at particular locations, as well as the kind of object ID. And then the last thing is then in the opposite direction, we have this location binding, essentially going from layer 6 in the morphological model to the behavioral model. And this is because of this co-location between these two columns that they have this relationship. Not all columns will have this feed forward blue and this feedback purple connection. but because they
You
do,
don't show the
basically,
purple connection. You don't show going back to the rocker model, but it would also go back to the rocker model,
that's true.
right?
Right.
The purple, right? So you
Right.
don't have to draw it. I just want to point
Right.
out
No,
that
it's a good point.
they're both children, both co-located, so they
Right.
would both get that feedback.
But yeah, but what that means is when we're at a particular location in this reference frame, we can predict the location that we would be in this model's reference frame. And that's what these L6 connections are for. The connections up here are more for kind of biasing and telling this model something about, what state, what behavior it should be expecting.
And also if the rocker, like the child object's orientation is changing, that can also be an input to the behavior model.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's down here. So now starting
Okay.
to add in more connections. So one of the things we clarified this last week, which wasn't directly related to motor outputs and things like that. I mean, it definitely has relevance, but anyways, was just clarity about exactly what Vivian was saying, which is that the change in the child object's orientation, that can be an input feature into this behavioral model. And so that's what's shown with this golden dashed arrow here, where as the rocker is moving, the morphological model it's estimating the pose of that rocker. And as that pose is changing, that's information that can be passed up. But what we would expect is that because the behavioral model is sensitive to change, it's only going to be paying attention to this change in the rotation. The model ID is not changing in this case, it's still the rocker. And so that is essentially, as far as the behavioral model concerned, invisible. It doesn't see that information, and so it's not going to learn it as part of its model. But so what it is going to learn is this concept of kind of an object changing in orientation in this particular way at a particular location.
I found this
Um,
confusing. I'm not sure. I'm still confused by it a little bit. How do we go from these little points of vector, the little blue arrows, which are just raw sort of movement data, to like, oh, this is the rotating orientation.
But as
Um,
in those are two separate kind of learnings that can take place. So one is based on the
but
direct sensory input, and this one is based on this hierarchical low level, like child object input.
right, but I guess the question is, where do I learn the change in orientation? How is it learned in the behavioral model?
I guess the
Uh,
idea is it would still be activating cells in layer 4, and so it would be bound to here, but it would just be a different representation in layer 4. So and potentially both could be learned so that you have both this local flow as well
Yeah,
as the
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but
yeah,
I still find it a little confusing when I start thinking about the actual details of what the behavioral model is representing. In
right.
some sense, we said, oh, it's representing, the layer 3 could be, oh, it's rotating up and rotating down. I guess that would really be, that's where you would expect to see that's representing the sort of the state of the model is sort of is the way I've been thinking about it would be like, oh, it's rotating right, rotating one way, rotating the other way. But the actual raw data is just these. Um, so to learning that the raw data is more like, oh, just these little edges are moving. So if I want to learn that, if I really want to say this thing rotates, I would sort of learn the transition maybe from 1 to 3 and layer 3. I don't know. It's still
but
confusing to me.
no, I think the idea is that the blue arrows are only based on actual flow detected in the sensory input. But then the yellow arrow could be in the same behavior model, it could be a separate behavior model, but it basically represents a change in the layer 6 representation of orientation of the rocker.
Right, right. But
And so that's
but where is
independent
that?
of the model itself. So it could be a change in orientation of a differently shaped rocker. It could be change of
Right, but where is it?
orientation. Yeah.
Where is that learned? Where is that? I mean, if it's not learned in the transitions on layer 4, where is it learned? I mean, if I'm learning the transitions on the blue hours are learned in layer 4, then where is the change in orientation learned and represented? It seems like those blue hours that's the baseline data, and yeah, I don't know. I'm still confused by it. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it
Yeah, I
doesn't.
mean,
So I mean,
I
I would assume it would be the input from the thalamus to layer 4 of the behavior model.
But
That represents the change
Yeah,
in
but
orientation.
but we don't have that input, do we? I mean, the thalamus represents the raw data. We know that, right? The thalamus is passing through those magnocellular cells to layer 4. But I don't know that the thalamus is passing. Is it passing the orientation directly to layer 4?
I'm not sure. I mean, it
I
definitely
don't think
knows
it.
about the orientation, so it seems like it could detect when that
Right,
changes. But yeah, I'm
it
not sure.
could. Just this morning I was talking to these guys on the BBC. I was thinking like along these lines, like we're getting to the fact that we're not simulating a brain here. We are modeling its functions, and I made the point like, oh yeah, our models don't have any neurons in them. It's not the way they work. And so this could be along those lines. It could be like, okay, we think this is happening. We can implement it and try it in various ways, even if we're not certain exactly how the biology does it. I don't think we can get off too far.
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think
I'm
we can.
not too worried
Yeah,
about it.
yeah. I mean, I think we can solve a lot of basic problems with just using the sensory changes, but then
Right,
also being able to use like changes in the representation of other columns or learning modules will make it a bit more generalizable. Like we can just represent
right,
child object as rotating in a behavior model.
right,
Yeah.
right. One thing that occurred to me as we talk about this is in vision is pretty obvious. In vision, you can say, okay, it's the magnocellular cells represent flow. It's not good in touch. Like, what if we do a robotic hand? Like, how do I, if I have a stapler in my hand and I'm opening the stapler, um, how do I know that, that there's no flow bits there? One hand's holding the top of the stapler, one hand's bottom of the stapler. On my fingertips, I'm not detecting any flow, right? But my two hands moving relative to the other is the thing that matters. Um,
It's similar with the
there's
eyes.
not
If you're doing smooth pursuit, you're not detecting any flow in your input, but your
right.
eyes are moving. But yeah, I think there
Uh,
will need to be a
well,
mechanism to
it's not
check.
even clear where the it's like in vision, you can say, oh, this information is coming from the retina. In touch, it's not clear where the flow information is coming from or the information I
Right.
need to differentiate these two. I'm not worried about it at all. I just point out if we want to build a practical robotic hand or limbs or something like that, we'll have to find the equivalent that that this part is moving relative to that part, and it's not going to come necessarily from the fingertips. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
or the
yeah,
fingertips wouldn't be sufficient. Um,
right. And then
it'll just be
there's all
part of
kinds of
it.
other things to come into play, like changes in the pressure on your fingertips is part of it.
Right.
These are all engineering problems. I don't think these are fundamental cortical Monty problem. They're engineering problems of a particular type. So I just point out that is some engineering we would have to do to build a robotic hand, is to figure out the equivalent of the magnocellular cells. Okay,
Can I ask
back to
one
your
more
picture.
question about the yellow arrow?
Sure.
Yeah, do you want so um it's clear from the sorry, I don't know why the screen is not okay, there you go. The yellow arrow is ending up I mean the dotted, not the change, is ending up in the boundary between L3 and L4. But is it a direct connection from maybe L6B from the rocker? Or is there like some intermediate like the rocker L6B, there's a connection back to thalamus, and thalamus connect, sends it up to like
Yeah,
the
so
behavior model.
well, I guess yeah, what
Yeah,
I proposed a couple of months ago was that it would go through the thalamus first and then come from there.
Okay.
But
right. That's not shown here, right? So
No.
I think your comment,
Yeah.
Jose, is that dotted L line maybe should be coming from the thalamus. Is that right?
Yeah, from the rocker to the thalamus and the thalamus to the behavioral. It's something like
Right.
that. Yeah. I think.
Right.
maybe
Yeah,
just
that makes
add a
Okay.
perfect sense.
circle or something that
Yeah, it just has.
like
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
oval.
I'll try to help Niels. Yeah, I know.
If you do something like this, oh, you got it. Okay.
Dueling edits. All right.
Um,
There you
Oh,
go.
cool. Okay.
Okay.
Well, there needs to be one for the blue one too, I guess. So that would be higher order.
Yeah, well, or I mean, I was partly thinking we could call this Thalamus, and then that might just simplify everything.
Yeah.
Fine.
Then the yellow
Okay.
line needs to go there.
Yeah.
Not the easiest. I think Excalibur is starting to optimize for our cortical diagrams.
Yeah.
How's that?
It seems like the arrows work better now, and they're not like snapping around all the time.
So AI in the background.
Yeah, right. I am impressed by how fast Excalibur is. Like, as in, you can zoom out and you can like select all of this stuff. I mean, I know most of it's vectorized, but still, and just like move it around, and it's like instantaneous.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
pretty good.
and
I
yeah, I feel
agree.
like in general, we finally achieved the sort of remote whiteboarding we kind of dreamed of, or at least a sufficient.
A few of you are more facile at this. I'm still,
But I mean,
I don't
it's
use it
definitely
enough.
taken me a while to get comfortable with it. But yeah, I feel like yeah, just like anything, practice it helps. Um,
So some of these details again are not really that important, but we do know that we've observed this flow change. We've pulled out a separate behavioral model. We pulled out a separate
yeah,
rocker child module, and then we are learning, and we're going to apply that change. Yeah, okay. It's
yeah, and
some
so
of
I
these
guess
details could
the
change.
reason to maybe emphasize this. So one is just to recap what we discussed. This was a useful kind of clarification of how these three columns might be arranged, which we hadn't kind of explicitly discussed before. And actually, it's a good example of heterarchy because this morphological model is a child of this behavioral model, and this morphological model, but this behavioral model is a child of this morphological model. So in this sense, these two columns are kind of both at the same level and also hierarchically, um, uh, yeah, at different levels.
And
But
yeah, but maybe one detail I'm not quite sure about yet, and that's maybe a bit different in your diagram then. How I was thinking of it is the rocking states. I think the way you drew it now are one is going in the one direction and the other is going in the other direction. But I think in some of the other figures I had made, it was like three states of it going into one direction, and then flipping it back down would be a separate behavior.
you mean this stuff here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to show the rocker as opposed to the flipping switch. Is that what you mean?
Like in the other diagrams I made, the arrows here in the second box would keep going in the same direction. They're not, and like the yellow one would be the same orientation change, just a bit further. Like it's three states of the rocker going in one direction.
Why is that?
Oh,
I'm confused.
Yeah, so
as
there
in as
will be a
you're trying to
locking.
show the continuous version of like
Yeah,
one behavioral change, right? Okay.
yeah.
So the
I'm
full
following. I'm
behavior
not
is
following.
not
Could you?
Like
full
up
behavior is
here,
not rocking, it's rocking up, right?
yeah, right. The behavior model is just rocking up. And the three states up here would be just three changes along that sequence.
Right.
Oh,
But
Yeah, I
so
guess
you're
here,
saying
yeah, I
there's
was
two different behavior models. You're saying there's a rocking up behavior model and a rocking down behavior model. Is that right?
right. I mean, it might be the same behavior model and it's applied in two orientations, but that basically the sequence up here for rocking is just for the one direction, instead of like having two states for the two directions.
yeah. Yeah, I guess I was trying to show like multiple of the behavioral models, but yeah, I don't know.
I just want to make sure I get this distinction. So it's different than I was thinking about it. So this behavior, there's two behavior models. You're saying one is going up and one's going down.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Like they would be rocking up, and rocking up has maybe, I don't know, three states of progressively changing its orientation. And then there's rocking
Well, if
down, and it has,
yeah, it might. Well, if it had three states, I'd imagine have to. I don't know why you'd have three states.
or
Does
more or
it
less
stop?
depending on the
Does it
resolution.
stop along the way?
No, I mean, it would
Is
just
that
be
what you're saying?
continuous change. I mean, it doesn't have to be 3. It could be 10. It could be 2. It just depends on what resolution you represent it at.
Hmm.
Like if it's a bit more of a movement than just a flipping switch, if it's more like a clock or something where it moves along a half circle, you wouldn't just have one change, you would have a
Right,
sequence of
right.
changes
It's
in
not
that
clear how the
direction.
system would know which are which. It's not 100% clear to me, but okay. But I think that sounds right. That at least you
Yeah,
have
it's maybe
there's
a
two
detail
behavior
that,
models. The two behavior models, by the way, could be in the same. They're in the same
Column.
column, the same learning module.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, does that mean they have different reference frames then? So the rocking up one has a different reference frame than the rocking down one. Um, it could
It
be.
kind of feels like, yeah, it would
Yeah.
depend on like how you tend to observe the behavior. It feels like if you tended to immediately observe it switching back as soon as it switches off or
Right.
whatever, then it would be one behavior model, but maybe it's more
Right.
likely
Like
it's background
what
separated.
if it was a momentary switch, and so you push it up, and as soon as you take your finger off, it flips right back down again. Um, or what if it was automatically went up and down? That'd be one behavior. But
Yeah, I
if
agree
it flips
that that
up
would be
and then
one. But yeah,
and
since
then
it's kind of two
but it
separate.
flips up and stays in that position, then that behavior is over. And then if it flips down, it's a new behavior. Yeah, it makes sense. So if
Yeah.
there's a gap in time between the two, then you'd say, oh, these are separate things. They don't exist at the same time.
Yeah,
Right,
so
because the behavior model is a continuously changing. It has to be continuously changing, and then as soon as it stops changing, the behavior model is done. It's over. It's not.
Yeah,
It's not. It's not.
right.
It's not invoked anymore.
yeah.
Okay, that
Yeah,
makes
right. Just
sense.
like you
Yeah.
drew it, Niels, is how I was thinking of it in this case.
Yeah. Yeah, so let me just I can clarify this later, but just for now,
At one point, I mentioned the idea that your switch could be like a rotating switch, where as you rotate, um, something else physically moves in coordination. It's not like on or off. It's more like, oh, as I rotate to the right, the light goes lighter and dimmer or something like that. And so you have to capture the idea that you're representing where you are in that sequence of behavior, um, which is related to this question. I think we have to accommodate all these different types of things.
yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that would be kind of the causal links between two behaviors. So if you're in one state
Yeah, but
of
but
one behavior.
yeah, right. I can think of two different ways it could go, and it's one way is like, oh, as I rotate this thing, let's say I have, it goes from 1 to 10. The thing that's physically moving when I'm rotating the knob, or I can rotate the knob in a little somewhere else, something goes up and down. They could be tied together. So wherever the position of the knob dictates where the position of the thing that goes up and down, or it can be like when I rotate the knob to the right, the thing goes up. Um, but then if I rotate it some more, it goes up some more. And if I rotate it left, it goes down. But they're not physically tied together like it's more like I want to move. They're different things. One, there's a lockstep. The switch and the thing that's moving are lockstep. And the other one's telling me like, oh, as this is moving, the other thing should be changing, but they're not lockstep. There's no like the rotating dial doesn't have positions. It doesn't lock into positions. You can just keep rotating forever, and it's an up and down. These are just variations on a theme that we've had with child objects. We have to make sure we can accommodate all these different types of linked behaviors.
Yeah.
And those link behaviors can be learned really fast too. Like
Right,
you can
right,
turn it and see it change, and you immediately know that that's the connection, and you can use
right.
that to achieve goals.
Yeah. So that's well, before so going into causal interactions, then the last one to mention in this diagram. Well, okay, yeah, sorry, just one last thing to say on this kind of hierarchy type thing. So one reason to emphasize this in terms of our aim of switching on the light was that having the child object representation here in the behavior model may be useful for deriving this direct motor projection. So in particular, because we've learned that okay, there's an object in the world moving in a certain way, rather than having to rely on kind of very local kind of sensory flow, which might still be useful in deriving an output, but this kind of object level representation may be a more efficient way of saying how we should act. But I'll touch more on.
They seem almost, they seem like those are two separate ways of doing it. It's hard to imagine that both would work. You know, it seems like you'd pick one or the other.
You
I
mean the
mean,
B
personally, I feel
model
like
or
if
the
you
M
if
model?
you kind of very slowly attend, um, you probably could rely on these like the blue arrows to derive kind of motion, but it would just be very labor intense and take a lot of time.
Why is it libertarian?
Well, just
Well,
because like
otherwise
you
you're
can only
burdening this.
understand how
You're
any
burdening,
small part of the world is moving at any point in time.
right? But otherwise you're burdening the subcortical motor region to do the same work, right? You say, "Oh, we're just rotating this," but how does it know how to do that? You know.
Yeah, I
At one
guess
point, I suggested,
I
"Oh, maybe you're." Remember, I suggested maybe it's projecting like an area in space and a behavior it has to do on it, and then we kind of said that didn't work. Um,
well, I
Or
don't think we said that wouldn't
yeah.
work. I thought we said that can't be the whole, or like that's not going to be the whole solution.
I
Mm.
mean, one option could
I
be
jumped.
that it's different, that those are not in the same model, that they are in different columns at different levels of the hierarchy. At the lowest level where we get direct sensory flow, that's the kind of commands we also send down to the subcortical motor regions. And then at higher regions in the hierarchy where we represent orientation of entire child objects changing, the signals that we send down therefore correspond to changes of larger areas in space.
Mm.
The motor regions
That
can
sounds
interpret
good,
that.
except I struggle sort of like there should be one universal language to describe these subcortical projections, and they could represent different things at different time, but it sort of has to be the same somehow substrate, which may work. I don't have a mental model of that right now. I'm
Yeah, I
struggling with
mean,
that. I still don't understand these subcortical motor region projections. I
Right.
just don't have a good.
yeah, I guess that's why I'm suggesting if it's in separate columns, it can be kind of the exact same language. It's basically saying, okay, at this location, move in that direction. And it's just depending on where the output comes from, it refers to a smaller or a larger area. But it's not like the information itself. Like it's not like the column
But
itself needs to
that's
communicate the
that would be
area.
just still that would be like push here versus figure out how to rotate this. Um,
Yeah.
well, I suggest this little subtopic is one that's worth spending some time thinking about, whether we do it in our London meeting or something else.
Definitely.
But really,
Yeah.
definitely sort of like, okay, what is the language of the subcortical projection? I mean, I've thrown out some ideas. Other people have thrown out some ideas. They're all kind of close, but they're not the same,
Yeah.
and it's not clear to me.
Yeah. And so, yeah, so to kind of zoom out in terms of last week. So, yeah, we talked about what this nature of this kind of subcortical projection might be. And I'll talk a bit about later some of the ideas we had around that, like, yeah, this kind of defining a region of space and things like that. But in general, for this task of kind of turning on the switch, a lot of our insights last week were more about how we can take the causal linking, which I'll talk about in a second, and kind of carry that forward to sort of simplify the problem. So it doesn't eliminate this. Ultimately, the only way the cortex is going to change the world is through these direct motor projections, but it kind of breaks the problem down and enables us to kind of use representations that can be learned quickly and that we can reuse to kind of generalize. So yeah, I think
So,
that. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
oh, so I know that, on Monday when we had our meeting, like, we said that the orientation, look at the reference frame that's coming out from the motor output L5 is an egocentric because it doesn't go through a thalamus. But I think there are many evidence, or at least a lot of papers of L5 pyramidal cells projecting to higher order thalamus, including like a paper that I like read about the different subclasses in L5.
This would be the
it-
efference copy, right?
I'm
This would be the
confused,
what?
Jose.
The efference
Sorry.
copy going to the higher order thalamus and then going back to the higher order column.
Right, this purple
I
line here.
see.
Yeah, you mean the branching connection? But
Yeah, I
but so
guess so.
that fits because the input to the
Yeah.
thalamus is normally egocentric. So it makes sense that if the output is egocentric, it needs to go through the thalamus before it can go back into a column. So it kind of supports the
Right.
idea
Yeah.
that it would be egocentric.
So layer 5A
Yeah.
somehow converts the allocentric orientation to egocentric orientation. And
I
then
see. Yeah.
then it can go directly to the motor, and then it has to get converted again back into the regions 2 proper orientation, because region 1 and region 2 don't share the same orientation. And so you can't just go from region 1 to region 2 directly. So you go from allocentric and region 1, convert it to egocentric, send it out, send the egocentric back into the higher order thalamus, and get perched to allocentric for region 2.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hope that made sense.
Yeah, I think this is shown here again.
Right.
Yeah,
I
so
mean, this is a
should be
crazy ass idea, but it seems like it has to be this, at least for an R theory, this has to happen. So
Yeah,
And here we're not showing the pink arrow from L5A to higher order, right?
we are. That's this one.
Okay. Okay. All right. I see.
Yeah.
That's okay.
you can't tell there's 3 different pinks there.
Yeah. Yeah. Never mind. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I
So
mean, does
No,
that help, OJ?
yeah. 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 I mean, so I mean, you were like, it was clarified on Monday, and then well, I didn't. I guess like I went back to the literature on like where these L5 pyramidal cells connect to, and basically it's supercalculus pons, higher order thalamus, striatum. So yeah, you know how I was like proposing maybe we don't need to worry about how to convert to egocentric because maybe it's allocentric and thalamus will take care of the rotation or the conversion. But never mind. Yeah,
well,
like I am
right. Well, I
dropping
think
it.
the idea that
Yeah,
it's worth just finishing up. The idea that it's projecting to the superior colliculus and to the pons are both the subcortical motor areas. And
yeah,
back to the higher order thalamus is the idea that that we talk about in the hierarchy paper, that
yeah,
is not a subcortical projection, but it's telling the orientation between the child up to the
yeah,
parent.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so that all makes sense. I don't know about the striatum. That should be considered a subcortical motor center or something else completely different. It'd be nice
Yeah.
to think of it as a subcortical motor area. But remember, the thalamus had its body map on the
Yeah,
top surface of not the thalamus, the superior colliculus had this sort of body map
yeah,
on it, and so you're just projecting right onto that egocentric body map, and presumably the
right.
pons would have something similar. I don't know. I actually have never read
Yeah.
anything about the pons, and I don't know about striatum. What do we know about striatum? I've forgotten about it, but
I think somebody did a
anyway.
presentation. I like again. I forget about it. Yeah, 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 yeah. So yeah, all clear. Sorry. All right, but we can move ahead.
No, it's good.
Yeah,
Don't be sorry at all. It's good. It's good. Don't be sorry at all. I'm
Um,
gonna look up about Paul.
but yeah, I
Striatum.
think yeah, Jeff, what you were just saying about the striatum. So I know I was mentioning recently, like, maybe it's an uncomfortable truth, but maybe the motor projections are all quite specialized, and to whatever, like, just depending on whatever they project to. But I guess that's one thing that could fit with that being the case, is if essentially it's just whatever receives it. So it could be motor in an eye sense, which is the ancient structure that's the superior colliculus. It could be motor in a more kind of body control sense, or it could be something like the striatum, but or even
Well, I don't think it's I don't
hypothalamus or
why
something.
is that an uncomfortable truth? If they all had some sort of egocentric map on them, it would just say that the visual cortex is not able to directly move other things other than the eyes, but it can direct the eyes within an egocentric map. I'm not sure why would that be inconvenient? It seems like it's
No, maybe not inconvenient.
Maybe
Just
that
that.
it contains a bit more information than just the location. That's
exactly.
specific to the effector, like it contains more something like apply force or grasp here, kind of
Or
information
attend
for
to a
certain
location, so
areas.
that like the eye ones would be talking about where we want to be sensing, whereas maybe whatever the hand is projecting to, hand columns is telling us like where we should be grasping. So in that sense, there is difference in the language between them.
Well, maybe I'd rather not go there yet until we prove it.
Yeah,
I
well,
feel like
that's
that's
what I
a
meant by
yeah,
uncomfortable. But
right. I
so
think that
all I
should
was
be
saying was the
not the
fact that
assumption.
we project the striatum as well, like that seemed even harder to kind of bring under the same, like the exact same
I
kind
don't
of
know because I don't
language.
know enough about the striatum. I don't know why that's.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that's true. I don't know yet.
Okay.
I would say the opposite. I would say this makes predictions about the striatum and what it should be representing. And so, right now I'm bringing up pictures of that right now. Um, so it's. I think it would be. It's unlikely, highly unlikely, that the layer 5 cells projecting have different languages for different parts of the cortex and different places they project. So let's assume that they're the same language as projecting, and we're going to burden the subcortical regions to interpret that language. And they would be different, right? Moving your arms and limbs is different than moving your eyes, and who knows what. Remember, the supercilious also moves your head in your neck, so
Right.
it's anything that changes the visual input. Um, well, let's not worry about it too much. But it's an interesting thing. If Jose is correct that another major source of subcortical projection is the striatum, then we can try to understand what the striatum is doing. It gives us some suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely true. I think we've discussed that before.
Well, I should keep going.
I
I'm
can't
reading about
remember
the
if it was the
striatum
same
right now, but you keep
population,
going.
but well, but yeah, should I move on? So yeah, so I said
Here,
understanding
I'm
this.
sorry. I'm reading
Oh
this
yeah.
paper. I'm just starting to read this paper in Cell Reports, and I'm just throwing out uninterpreted comments here. It says it's got the divisions. The patch and matrix component represents an additional spatial organization proposed to mirror a motor motivational regionalization. Says
This is the
clearly
Do you
striatum.
involved
have the
in.
So
paper
as
up?
in kind of like a
Yes,
map.
yeah. I'm looking at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I need to read this, but it's
Yeah.
not out. It's not. It's like, oh, it sounds like it might be good. Okay,
Yeah.
let's go back to the picture.
Yeah, and of course it might be like a mixture, like location, the concept of space is probably still key and universal. Um,
Uh, Yeah,
but
right. Who knows? Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So anyway, so yeah, understanding these is still a key kind of part to solving this turning on the light switch. And as Jeff said, we don't yet have a good understanding of that. That'll probably be a major focus for a future focus week. But one thing we did make progress on is how we can use these causal associations between columns to enact goals. And so these were ones that we had previously had some proposals for, where essentially this would represent a goal state coming in. So for example, if you imagine we have this switch, again, this is let me just quickly add these labels. This is an M model and a B model. We have this goal coming in of the switch on, and maybe that's coming from a light column that's not shown that we've learned. So for the moment, we're simplifying things by assuming that's learned, and we're just receiving that goal state. And then we have two connections here that have that first need to be learned, and that will enable us to basically, or enable rather, this M model to try and get this rocking behavioral model into the necessary state. And we're generally calling these the kind of causal association or the forward model, and then the inverse model. And
Can
one
I ask
thing
a question about this?
yeah,
Is this the intent of today's meeting? Just to, I hope I'm not getting off track here. Um, on one level, I think of myself as the causal relationship should be between two behavioral models. It's like one change invokes another change. That seems to be what it should be. It's like the switch changing is the light turning on. and less about like, oh, the light being on is the result of it's. I'm just wondering, is there really a causal relationship between the morphology models and the behavior models? It feels
I
like
mean,
it should be always between
So
two
that
behavior
was, I mean,
models.
that was one of the things we agreed on.
Discuss,
That was kind of a
yeah.
I
new
mean,
conclusion.
I don't know
So
if it's proper to call it a causal association in this context. I mean, I thought we were saying we learn a causal
Oh.
association when we flip the switch and when we see the behavior and we recognize a different state of the switch. But then in this, now we have a goal and we want to achieve that goal. So it's not really causal, it's kind of figuring out the inverse causality, right?
yeah, but I'm first talking about the causality, and one thing we had agreed on last week. Obviously, we can change our mind, but was that our kind of working definition of causality is a change in state in one object invokes a change in another in state in
Right,
another
right,
object, and both
right.
morphological and behavioral laws can have one or multiple states. So that means that they can be
Mm,
causally associated.
Yeah,
Personally, I
I
think
agree
this
with
makes
mm.
that. I
sense.
just mean in your diagram, I think that it was about now about achieving the goal, right?
Well, I was going to first describe that we need to learn this association,
Oh,
Yeah,
or
okay.
like that we also
well,
learned this one, because I was going to say that we clarified that the importance of state one in modeling this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no,
Um,
never mind then.
but yeah, so
and
Jeff,
I'm sorry, can
I
we
guess in
just go
terms of
back
your
to the
point, yeah,
picture?
personally, I still feel comfortable with this. I think this sounds right. So
What that any state, well, where's it stated there? Where there's change in state in one object. So, it's funny because the morphology object doesn't represent a change in state. I mean, it doesn't represent changes. It's either one state or the other. Um, the only place I would know the change of state is in the behavioral model. So even though this sentence could be true, I don't know if morphology models ever know they're changing their state. Um,
I mean, how
is there
would
a
going from
representation?
the off state to the on state not be a change?
Well, it would be, but it would also be reflected in the behavioral model of the object. So I have these two states of the light, the on state and the off state, but the behavioral model may not represent that anything has changed. It just says, oh, I see this light in the on, or I see this light in the off. But the only place that really notices it's changing would be the behavioral model. It says, oh, something has changed here. So a morphology model can link to the behavior model. I could say, for example, I have a goal, which is the light should be on. And I look at the light, and then I realize the light has a behavioral model, and the behavioral model turning on, that is the thing which is reverse causation, as opposed to the morphology model itself. In my world, the morphology model has no idea that its state has changed. It's just
I guess,
it's
yeah, the
just a morphology.
proposal, I guess the proposal for that here would be that these horizontal gray arrows, so the transition between the two states would
Where's the
look up,
horizontal gray arrows?
uh,
Over there, right there.
yeah,
Yeah. I
that
don't.
these would
I
represent
objected to that.
transitions.
I objected to that before too. Um,
But I think we
when I
agreed
look,
that you need to know, like, you need to know what state you're currently in and to be able to predict the next state given a behavior.
Yeah.
So there needs to
Yeah,
be some
and
kind
one
of
one thing I liked
transition
about this
representation.
personally is it felt like it wasn't trying to treat behavioral columns as being too special. Like I just think naturally we're going to have different states represented up here, and and going between states can be causally associated with the activity in other, like the state in other columns. So I feel like trying to trying to kind of treat morphology models in like a special way. I don't know. Seems and whereas this seems
I'm
to
trying to
like
treat
solve
them.
this problem quite well.
I mean, yeah, to me, the
Uh,
definition of the morphology model is that it receives static input, but it doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean that it can't change its internal state.
Right.
right, but what I have trouble with is learning these transitions in the morphology model, because those transitions can be quite complex. That's why we have a behavior model. the behavior models can learn the complex changes in state. I could imagine, for example, an object that has multiple states in its morphology model, but the transition patterns varies by some other context. And so it can't learn, it needs to know that other context. It could be just very complicated. It could be like the light may turn on and off immediately, or may turn on and blink and then turn it off. Or, there's a whole bunch of state changes in the morphology model that are complicated. And that's the whole reason of having the behavioral model separated, because I separate out those complicated behaviors into separate behaviors, as opposed to trying to burden the morphology model with it.
But I mean, isn't more the difference that the morphology model is going to learn when, at the moment that things aren't moving, so it can develop a map based on static features. The behavioral model is going to be learning when something is moving. But
Right.
some behaviors in the world can be described as a sequence of keyframes. And so there's no reason that the morphology model wouldn't learn
Well,
that.
it could be described that way, but you could also describe it as, because I'm saying that sequence of keyframes is can be very complex, that sequence, and it can also be not keyframes. It can be all kinds of other stuff. So I'm asking a different question. I said, what if I didn't have those horizontal arrows? Could the system still work? Could I have a goal to be in the on state of the lamp, let's say, and then I look at the lamp, it invokes the behavioral model. The behavioral model says everything. It knows everything that can occur.
But I thought
Right?
last week on Thursday we decided that there's a need to know the current state to be able to know
I
it.
know we did that. I know we did that. It's still striking me as somehow, now I'm thinking about it. It still strikes me as odd. Okay, I'll let go on here, but it feels wrong to me that the morphology model is going to learn state transitions when those state transitions can be quite complicated and contingent on other things. And it's simple to say, oh, there's this on and off, it knows which one's next. But in reality, most of the time, it wouldn't be able to do that.
But
That is why we
is
have
there a
behavioral
reason
models.
we'd assume morphological models can't learn something as complex as a behavioral model? I mean, it's the same neural hardware. It's just one is getting input that changes, one is getting inputs that's static. So
Because
if
behaviors
a
are more
particular
than just,
behavior is really
behaviors are more than,
complex, I feel like that's going to be complex for the behavior model to model as well.
no, but the behavioral model catches all the motions and changes and gyrations that's going on. Where in the morphology model, all you can do is like transitions between keyframes, right? Otherwise, if you're trying to learn things like rotations and so on, then what's the point of having a behavioral model? We
Yeah, I
tried
mean,
that earlier.
the morphology model won't detect the transition itself. It won't see the change happening, but it should be able to know if I was in the off state and rocking behavior occurred, then I expect to be in the on state. Whereas
Right,
if
if the
another
rocking
behavior,
behavior occurred, uh, well, you could also argue that when the rocking behavior occurs, it just tells me my child has moved and now I have a different morphology. I don't have to have learned that. The rocking behavior could have learned it for me.
yeah,
Well,
but
I don't want to get hung
in
up.
other cases, you need to know what state you were in before, like in the double switch and things like that, where like the same behavior
Right.
could get you into different states depending on where you were before.
I know. We talked about this and we concluded that. Um, it strikes me as worrisome. How about that? I won't say it's wrong. It's worrisome. It seems like a slippery slope. All of a sudden, if we rely on the morphology model to learn state transitions, then it's simple to say, oh yeah, the on and off, two state transitions, right? But in reality, state transitions can be quite complicated. And we can't expect the morphology model to know them. That's why we have a separate behavioral model. So I don't have an answer. I just feel like it just strikes me as worrisome that the morphology model shouldn't be trying to learn that stuff, or shouldn't
Yeah, I mean,
rely
it
on it learning
wouldn't
it.
learn any details about the transition. It wouldn't learn how the flow patterns happen to do the rocking into the different state. It wouldn't learn anything that needs to happen to go from off to on. It would just learn that if this other model that learned this, the behavior model, is being detected, then I transition into this next state. Like,
Okay, I'll let it ride for now. I can't express my concern
Yeah,
better at the
if
moment.
it helps, I've under our new pending open questions, I've added a note that, although we quote unquote
You can
agreed on
say,
this, that there's some
you can say
concern.
Jeff is, you could have just said Jeff is still confused. Jeff is confused by this. That'd be more accurate description.
We'll see.
Jeff is getting old. He can't fixate anyone.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah,
Small thing.
at least if I was gonna, oh, go ahead, Jose.
Sorry, so small thing. Can we? I mean, this is just going to help me, but can we, instead of B1, can we just say just B, or because we're going from one state of the morphology to the other, but the behavior is like the entire behavior rocking up, however many
Well,
states that could
it's a
be.
particular, I mean, we could call it BA or something, but it is a particular behavior state.
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
one behavioral. Is it behavioral state or is it an entire behavior?
I mean, it would be a behavioral state. We wouldn't be expected to be in the on state if
That's
we're
true.
still at the
Okay.
beginning of the rocking sequence.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, all right, then. Yeah, we can go back to
I
B1
guess it'd
then.
be B3. I don't know. Or
But yeah, like basically the fact that this is one has no association with that one, but whether we call it, I don't know, I feel like if we call it three, maybe that's confusing as well. Or maybe that helps. I don't know. As in like three referring to this.
yeah, it's like once the behavioral sequence reached its end, then we expect to be in the
Yeah.
on state of the morphology.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fair. Uh, sorry, Hoji, is it possible to move the
Oh, yeah, sorry.
um so yeah, but so at least if I was going to as you've just heard, for those who are joining us from who weren't there last week, there's still some stuff to kind of figure out. But if I'm going to recap last week, at least what we agreed on there was that um, yeah, we can basically form causal associations between behavioral models and morphological models because causality is basically just a change in state in one model causing a change in state in another model. Um, and there can be different states in both these kinds of models. Um, so that was one thing that we kind of talked about and agreed on. The other thing was that when learning this causal association, we agreed that it was important to have for like the column here that's learning this causal association, for it to integrate its current state in this representation. So as in for it to learn that when it's on the switch off state and then it experiences the kind of rocking on behavior, that it's going into switch on, it's not sufficient just for it to have the kind of rocking behavior. So B3 is not sufficient to tell you S2. You need S1 switch off and B3 to tell you switch on. So that was one thing. And then on the last day, it became clear that actually the same applies for the inverse model. So the inverse model, um, and this forward and inverse model at its basic level were predates last week, but yeah, there was some clarification. So the inverse model is basically how this column, if it wants to be in the state S2, so switch on, and it's currently in switch off,
Yeah.
thanks. This is how it's going to learn that it needs to invoke rocking in this B model. And again, this was something that kind of Rami realized and pointed out, was that we need this switch off context in order to basically invoke the appropriate behavior. And this might tie into some suggestions Vivian had made about how kind of different states might be integrated at different levels of neurons and things like that. But basically, this helped to make these, I think, these forward and these backward connections a bit more rigorous and something that we could actually implement, or closer to something we could actually implement. So yeah, I think that's what this point here summarizes. So for both the causal association and inverse model, we need to integrate the existing state whether you're predicting the next state or predicting the necessary behavior to achieve something. You need to know the current state.
And I guess one of the questions Rami brought up was whether the entire inverse model basically exists in the morphology model, then the morphology model knows to invoke the rocking ID, or whether the morphology model just sends out switch off, switch on, and then the behavior model learned which behavior to
Right.
invoke for that. And I think we were tending towards the first option because it seemed like the behavior model shouldn't need to learn all the different state
Yeah,
possible
exactly. And
states,
so that's
but
kind of how I tried to show it
yeah,
was the first
yeah.
was that option that we were kind of and yeah, for what it's worth, well, I think we probably won't get to going through this document, but I think it would be worth afterwards if you all kind of go through, and because this is basically a more this is actually kind of written out everything we discussed, and so it covers that, for example, like the two approaches, um, and then yeah. So then maybe the last thing to point out in this diagram is just to revisit this purple arrow, this co-located um, top-down feedback between the switch M model and the B model, which earlier in the week we were kind of umming and ahhing, how essential is this? And basically we decided that this is important. And the intuition for that is that, and I should say this is important when trying to achieve this goal state. And the intuition for that is, okay, so you want the switch on. Um, that's what the goal state for the switch model. It wants to kind of convey to the rocking column both that it needs to be in that state. And that's what this green arrow is sufficient for. So it can tell it, okay, you need to be rocking on state. But the tricky thing is if we are looking at this switch in the real world, this is up here. Nothing about looking at this switch tells us where we are on it in the behavioral model, because the behavioral model only sees change as it's happening. And so when this switch, remember that right now we just have the goal state of getting it on. We aren't observing it switching on. So this switch is kind of invisible from the point of view of the behavioral model. And because it's invisible because this kind of blue channel is silent, there's no way, and this yellow one for what it's worth, there's no way for it to infer where we are in its reference frame. And so the only way we can derive that seems to be from this top-down feedback.
And why do we need to know where we are in the reference frame? I mean, that sounds like a silly question, but
Yeah, I mean, no, I think it's a reasonable question. I guess our feeling is that for this this projection, that's important.
Because
But it might be that if we just keep causally linking, then it's less important in this case. But I think if we're going to project subcortically, we're going to be giving an egocentric location. And so in that case, it's going to be essential to know where we are in our allocentric reference frame.
yeah, that was that problem of
Ma-
if we don't know that, then one part of our equation to output an egocentric location is missing. And
I'm thinking maybe at a higher level, thinking like, okay, we have the green arrow, which is a causation, right? And the green arrow just says, hey, this state transferred here, in the morphology model. That's what the back green arrow does, right? It says I had a state transition, and that state transition might be able to invoke several different behavioral models. There could be there could be multiple things that actually change when the morphology model switches shape. There might be multiple movements on the object in different locations. So which actual behavioral model you invoke is not just determined by the reverse causation, but about which behavioral model is you're currently attending to. So
Wouldn't this
um,
select a particular behavior model and
well,
state that
well,
we want?
let's imagine maybe imagine when the light goes on, I just I think of it in terms of the light for the moment, right? So the light goes on, and it's now in a different state. Or even just take the rocking of the switch. Let's say maybe I have like 5 different switches on an object, and I rotate one switch, and maybe the other switches move too at the same time. So, so I would associate that first behavior with 5 other behaviors. Maybe they don't rotate. Maybe a light comes on and something rotates. There's a bunch of behaviors that occur when I rotate the switch. And so I would associate there'd be a causal link between the switch going on and all those other behaviors. There are different locations in the world. So that
Yeah, so
backwards green
those
arrow
are the
is not a
forward, that's
one-to-one,
the
it's a
forward
one-to-many.
connection. That's the forward
Well,
connection.
no, that would be, well, no, because right at the moment, the behavior model is not invoked at all, right? No, but it's not invoked at all. We're trying to invoke the behavior model.
No, but
And we're trying to
what I
pick,
feel like you're describing is learning the causal association between the behavior model and another behavior model. So in the example you gave, you rock the switch, and then that's going to be causally associated with another behavior model, which is like light coming on or button twirling or whatever. And those would be different behavior models. And then if we wanted to invoke one of those,
but
they
but
would
you're
all
pointing
point
at
they would all point
morphology.
back to this rocking model.
I didn't follow that, Niels, but it doesn't sound like what I was talking about. I was just
Okay.
saying, is it possible that the backwards causation
I don't know if
could
we
evoke
okay. Sorry.
it
Yeah,
could
you can.
invoke different behavioral models in different locations in space? They're
That
separated, so
would,
they're not
yeah,
the
so
same
to me
behavioral.
that would be if there's multiple causes. So as in like the only way to turn on this switch is to turn on 2 different switches upstream. I
Why
think
is
that's an
that?
example of what you're describing, right? So you have
No,
multiple necessary causes for an effect.
no, I'm not describing that. I'm just saying, is it possible that a change in state of the morphology model leads to different behavioral models at different locations in space? That is, multiple things will change
But
simultaneously, but they're different locations.
the morphology model doesn't cause the behavioral model.
Well, but you've got this backwards green arrow, right?
Yeah,
Isn't
that's
that
the
invoking a
inverse
different,
model. But the causal
right? I'm
association is
talking
the
about that.
forward one.
Oh, right. Well, to me, the inverse model is just a different type of causation, right? It was like an imagined state. So just imagine that the back green arrow could invoke multiple behavior. It does that, right? It's like an imagined state in the morphology model invokes the behavior model. Imagine there's multiple behavior models that there's I just could imagine there was multiple behavior models that are active at the same time in different locations, and therefore the causational back arrow, the green arrow that goes to the left, could involve multiple behavior models, and you don't know which one you're attending to unless you have the purple location.
Okay, yeah. So I mean,
It's
to me, I think a concrete example of that is like I said, the morphology model only changes if like multiple switches are turned on or whatever. Um, but maybe that doesn't really matter. I guess what you're just saying is that the location might also be helpful for that.
well, imagine there was multiple behavioral models and they were causally linked. So when one behavioral model activates, the other one behavior activates, but they're just separate places on the world. They're not one model
Right,
like we talked about in the beginning of this meeting. They're
right.
different places. And so you change one, they all change. You change the other, they all change. So now I have a single back green arrow that goes to all those different behavioral models that are causally linked. So how do I know which one I'm attending to? Which one should I see at this moment in time? That would be the purple back arrow. I'd have to know where I am on the morphology model to predict
Yeah.
what
Yeah,
sort of
and I feel like
change I'm
depending on
seeing.
how complex the arrangement is, we may have kind of a morphology model that's a bit more like a scene representation or something like that, which is kind of giving us the arrangement of these different objects.
Yeah. So all I'm doing is coming up with an argument why you need the purple back arrow being
Yeah,
specific location because
even without maybe the motor output.
right the green arrows may not be sufficient to tell
Yeah.
you which one you should be observing now.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Imagine that in the stapler, imagine when I lift up the top, the base plate rotates. So what am I expecting to see? It depends if I'm looking at the base plate or I'm looking at the top. I'm doing the same object. I'm doing the same opening thing, but which behavior model I should be seeing at that point in time depends on where I'm attending to on the morphology object. I'm sorry, there's a hand waving. It might be kind of off, and I might not be getting it right. I was just coming up with. I could imagine scenarios where you might want the purple arrow back, because you have to distinguish which behavior model you're attending to right now, even though because multiple
Yeah.
ones are active.
Yeah, because this example kind of masks it because it's such a simple. There's just like one
Right,
behavior at one
right,
location. But yeah,
right,
if this was a
right.
complex object with, first you need to press this button and then you need to press this button.
Or
It's
there's a
gonna
bunch
be-
of things that change simultaneously.
yeah,
Like I rotate the stapler open and multiple things on the stapler change at once.
yeah,
Or even Rami's exploding logo had multiple pieces that were moving separately. Which behavior, let's say there was a behavior model for each part that was moving. Well,
yeah,
which behavior model I'm observing and inferring depends on where I am on the parent object. Am I
right.
following the logo? I'm in the icon? Am I following the word, this word or that word? So to predict the right behavioral model that you'd be observing requires knowing where you are on the parent object, the cup.
Yeah.
It's just, we could just say we agree that there's going to be a back purple arrow. I'm just saying this might be a reason for it.
No, but I think it's good to think of other reasons than this. Yeah. And then yeah,
I think,
yeah.
go on.
Well, yeah, and then so I was just going to say, just because I feel like we kind of raced through it, just to recap why the purple projection is important for this part is that, and this also relates to kind of the discussion we had earlier, where Jose was asking about, is that we are getting inputs in the reference frame of our body, egocentric. The reference frames within columns are allocentric, they're object-centric. And then in order for things to be interpretable for our subcortical systems, they need to be egocentric again. And so in order this conversion to take place, you can imagine if we just know kind of where the sensor is that's feeding into this column, that doesn't tell us anywhere about, okay, if we need a change to happen in my model at a location, that's insufficient information to tell us where that change needs to happen. It's that combination of, okay, where's the sensor? Where's my model relative to the sensor? Where am I wanting to change the world relative to that sensor? It's that combination that then allows us to output, okay, this is relative to the sensor, relative to the body. This is where we need the change to happen.
It's not that the sensor is going to do it. You're saying it's still going to be
Yeah,
right. It could
it's
be
not the
anybody
sensor.
doing it.
I'm just using the word sensor because that's in
Yeah,
Monty, that's
yeah,
how we tend to do the egocentric
yeah,
coordinate. But
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the
Right.
only way it would work without knowing where we are on the model is if the change needs to happen exactly where the sensor currently is, so we can just
right,
pass through the location we're getting as input. But if the change needs to be happening somewhere else on the behavior model, we need to be able to say, okay, here in my model's reference frame, I want to be next. And then that needs to be translated
right.
into egocentric space.
So yeah, so as I said, we kind of got a bit more information, or like, yeah, we thought through the top-down connection. We also thought a bit more about the causality, and then that developed a bit further. Actually, before I get to that, maybe a way to kind of then summarize our kind of views is that there's kind of two complementary paths for achieving a goal. One is this kind of causal linking in the inverse model, and the other one is the direct motor outputs. Ultimately, all kind of changes in the world will have to invoke these motor outputs. But
So are there really two separate ways of doing it, or is it just that you might follow causal links
yeah,
before you
you
do
might
an
follow
output
path
motor?
one for much longer before you invoke path two.
Right. So we always end up with a subcortical projection,
Yeah,
and you're saying, but we might do a series of causal links before we start doing anything.
yeah.
Is that
And I would
right?
say a shift in group opinion that happened over the week was initially we were kind of maybe more bullish on path 2 being kind of very powerful, and then we'll just have to figure that out. But then agreeing that actually we can use path 1 quite a lot, and that can kind of simplify the problem of deriving this path 2, and that is what this stuff is for. So
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
the
basically
column on the
saying
left
that,
there, is the column
like,
on the
say,
left a morphology model, behavior model? That's a
it's a
what is it?
behavior model in the motor cortex, I think.
Yeah, but what about the third one now? On the three, we have 3 models here now. What's
yeah,
one on the left
maybe
on that?
Yeah, I think that's what Niels meant with we
sorry,
can rely more on path 1, that like instead of sending out more complex output about pressing your finger somewhere or grasping somewhere, we can have a behavior model in motor cortex or some other sensory cortex that models the behavior of grasping or pressing, and then that column outputs a more specific motor output to a
So
specific behavior.
that is a behavior model elsewhere.
Yeah.
yeah.
Model cortex. I just wanted to make sure it's definitely a behavior model. Okay.
Yeah, well, so I would say, so yeah, this was one of the interesting things we were talking about on.
But you know,
okay.
I forgot this. I'm sorry. But you know, the problem. Sometimes you know exactly how you want to do it. Like, oh, I'm going to use my hand to grasp this, but we also know it. Sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes you have to do something else. So how's that accommodated? So this is the thing you just showed earlier with the three models is more like, oh yeah, I know how to grasp this. Tell the grasping thing to do it.
Yeah,
As
so maybe
opposed to
this
I can't
captures this
grasp.
a bit. This maybe captures that a bit better. So, but yeah, in general, this was something we discussed on the last day. I think we all agreed this
Yeah.
was interesting, but I think there's a lot of clarity that's still missing about exactly how this would work.
Maybe
But
if
yeah,
we show the little picture above this first, I think that
yeah,
illustrates kind of how it generalizes in a
yeah.
simple way.
But yeah, so okay, now we're talking about a light switch that flips up and down. And then the idea is essentially to link flipping as a behavior with upwards moving as more of a motor behavior. And that by kind of linking these, there's basically various ways that upwards moving can be achieved. And so that's where we're going to kind of, firstly, that's where we might get some generalization. And also, because upwards moving would be modeled in the motor cortex, it's a bit more intuitive to think about what is the direct motor projection, because then we're not asking a column in V2 or whatever to say, oh, you should be moving up here. Maybe the columns in V2 are saying you should be attending here. And then it's a column in motor cortex that its motor output is saying, oh yeah, you should be moving, like you should be applying an upward force or whatever at this location. So it kind of breaks down the problem in that sense.
Well, it could be that the visual column is actually imagining that movement up as well, and
that's true. Yeah, and kind of
and
helping.
it can.
Right.
It just says I'm imagining moving up, and so I'm imagining moving up. Someone has to do it.
Right.
I don't know. It's so confusing to me a bit. It just comes back to me. I still don't feel like I feel like the thing that's really missing in my head is this understanding the subcortical projection thing.
Yeah, the direct.
Which
Yeah.
is what we're talking about here, right? In some sense.
Yeah, well, I guess we're talking about both, but one of the things we're talking about is yeah, following this path 1 for longer.
Right.
And so yeah, we didn't agree exactly how many columns there would be, what they would look like, but some of the stuff that was kind of discussed was that you could imagine in somatosensory or motor cortex having this kind of relatively general model of kind of forward pressing or something like that, which is causally linked to rocking. So that's for the rocker, that's the equivalent of this upward moving. That already maybe would project to a motor region, and or it might be linked to more specific limbs, like your index finger or maybe your elbow. And this is where this could invoke different limbs depending on the situation, but you would only need to have learned this kind of more abstract representation in the context of rocking. in order to link all these. One kind of interesting thing we talked about was that maybe kind of somatosensory and motor cortex is a bit different from visual cortex in that we have quite kind of essentially specific receptive fields for each body region, so that at least in some columns, they're going to be kind of uniquely bound to parts of our body in a way that, you know, the fovea is kind of representing, is, you know, constantly reused for all visual representations in a way that we may not kind of see with these columns. But there's a lot of question marks here. Yeah, you know, how are, if all these motor projections are happening, which I think at a certain level we think, you know, it makes most sense if these are all kind of playing a role. Like there's not much point in all these pink projections if all that ever happens is the motor cortex, you know, outputs this motor command. So yeah, how these coordinate, you know, where did these columns exist? Should they be in visual, somatosensory, both? But yeah, I think it's an interesting idea that we are probably going to explore more of again during the focus week. And yeah, so this is kind of just showing how path one can extend quite long and get quite kind of complex. And then path two, this is the direct motor output. And so this is where one of the things we kind of talked about, this was actually kind of at the start of the week, was how this might be specifying something quite general, like an object, and that object, you know, there's no ID, there's nothing like that. It's kind of almost just like a model-free notion of an object in some egocentric area needs to be displaced by kind of delta, and this kind of egocentric region or area may not be a single point in space, but may actually be kind of, yeah, more like a kind of cloud or kind of region. And we talked about different ways that that might be defined by columns, such as a kind of set of columns, each outputting a target, and how that would kind of might define a shape. And it may be that, you know, this would coordinate with other columns. So for example, if the set of columns, like you were saying, Jeff, you know, representing the visual flipping behavior, they're kind of imagining this switch moving. And at the same time, you know, maybe path two is invoking finger pushing. And then that's actually outputting a more kind of specific command about the hand. But ultimately, that kind of information is combined about where this should actually be happening in order to kind of give us the final motor output that's, you know, nerves controlling muscle fibers. But yeah,
It seems like if I'm following this, it seems like there's two things going on here. One is the generic one, right, which is on the left side here, that's saying, oh, there's a region of space we need to rotate it clockwise or something like that.
yeah.
And then on the right, it's more like, oh, we have specific ways of doing that. You know, finger pushing.
Well, yeah,
so
kind of. Although I think we're thinking that when you invoke like a motor behavior, that could also be quite abstract. Like motor behaviors don't always need to be specific.
Well,
but you would have a learned association. So you would have like observed it or done it by accident or through exploration and learned that association. The difference,
well,
I would agree that this is more general in that this might be something that you can kind of derive directly from your behavior model, where you just say, okay, well, my behavior model is this kind of pattern of movement. I want that movement to happen in the world.
Right. Well, it seems like
happen.
that absolutely is. That seems to be essential. We do that. We can flip the
Right.
switch using different things. So it seems like, and the other one, it also seems like, but I have default behaviors for doing this. If I go around my house turning on light switches, I almost always use the same hand, the same finger. You know,
But I mean,
you know,
in terms of that particular thing, I think path one could still enable you to use different limbs, for example.
Yeah, it's just
right.
about
But so
whether you burden the motor system to pick what to use or whether the cortex actually chooses which one to use.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, it seems like I have to have both of these, right? I have to have the
So I
ability
agree
to
with
do
you. I guess maybe
generically.
I'm agreeing, I think for a different reason, which it feels like it's not so much the ability to generalize to other limbs. I mean, maybe that's the mechanism. So it could be a reason that you need both, but it feels to me like one of the key things is still this idea of like deriving a action from the behavior model. Because so one thing about this is like with this proposal, the behavior model itself, assuming that we just tell like pushing here, and this output is just like where to attend in space. It's not telling anyone how to move it or whatever. Then the behavior model, its purpose is actually really more like inference and recognizing behaviors so that we can causally link them. We're not actually making use of this information to derive an output. But I think our general intuition is that we do want to be able to do that.
But we have to be able to do it sometimes, right? If my hands are
Yeah,
occupied.
exactly. Well, so I actually have a real world example from last night where we have an electric switch which is having a fault in the lighting, and I'm sure it's safe, but just until we have an electrician look at it. So it's two. There's switches on either end of a hallway. So I just want to make sure nobody, because it doesn't turn on even when you switch it on. I want to make sure it stays, in the off state. So I put some tape over one end of the rocker. But I obviously have observed tape being used to restrict things, but I've never seen tape used to restrict a light switch. But my understanding of kind of the physics of a switch is what and basically how I wanted the behavior to be to kind of restrict the movement through that behavioral sequence. That is kind of what informed, okay, well, how might this be achieved? So that feels
an interesting example, but that
feels at least partly like an
orthogonal.
example of kind of where your understanding of the behavior, like there's just lots of examples. Or I talked last time about the animals putting water in a tube or whatever. Just these kind of cases where it's almost more like physics, where it's not just like a causal linking. It's a potentially entirely novel situation, but because of your understanding of how the world evolves, then you can infer a behavior or like a action output.
Well, one thing that seems important here, which you mentioned, but I just want to pull it out again, is that it seems like just take the simple light switch. Most of the time, I don't think about it. You're just not even aware you did it. I mean, yeah, if they ask me, did I turn the light switch, I'll say yes. But when there's an issue, when there's something like when I can't use my right hand and my right index finger, I always have to attend to this. There's an extra mental step. It's like, oh, what can I use? It's like so often I do these things. I'm sitting here drinking out of my coffee cup. I don't think about how I'm going to flip this little thing open and close. I've been doing it all morning here, but I'm not. Yes, did I do it? But was I thinking about it? No, I didn't think about it, but I did it. Whereas if it was stuck or I couldn't use my normal hand, it required a tool or something, I'd have to be looking at it and go, what the hell's wrong here? So I'm just wondering, it seems like these two paths, if I'm getting it right, there seems to be a default path that I've learned, which is use the same finger, the same action over and over again. It just doesn't require attention. Whereas when you do the alternate one, like the other path, it does require attention. That's all. I'm just making that. I'm making that proposal. It's somewhat of an observation, but somewhat of a proposal. So it's more. It's that attentional mechanism could play an important role here in deciding how these things are done. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does it make sense? Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe on a high level, to make sure we all agree on that, we need both paths and they're complementary to each other. In some situations, we rely more on the kind of cortical causality pathway, and in other cases, we rely more on direct motor output and giving a general region in space that we want to observe change in.
Right. That's the summary.
And the cortical one can still be quite general. Like it can be quite specific, but it can also probably invoke like abstract representations that enable us to follow alternative paths.
The cortical one being I don't know which path.
That's path one, the green one. The green one.
Okay. Well,
the output from the cortical path would be more specific to an actuator, like the pink motor object.
Right.
That's what I
But
thought. So it would be less
you
general.
can arrive at different outputs
Right.
through that path. Like, you
I'm
don't
just trying to say the green path doesn't only work with like a very specifically learned association. Like I think the green path would still be relevant when you maybe when you use your elbow to turn on the switch as well.
So would you
Yeah.
agree this? Anytime you there's times you have to attend to this and sometimes you don't. So there can be like a default path which seems you don't have to attend to it. And then anything else beyond that, you have to attend to it, whether it's a low level change in the pathway or a high level change in the pathway.
Right.
It seems like there are things you do without, like I'm driving the car this morning and I'm using the directional stalk on the steering wheel. I just don't think about it. I just grab it. I always do the same thing. Every once in a while, I find myself in the car and for whatever reason, I can't grab that thing. And then I have to use my hand or side of my hand or something like that.
Wait, which thing
So
in
there
the car
really
say?
seems the directional signal stalk, you're turning
Oh,
left
right.
and you're
Yeah.
turning right. Right. My point is that's a very repetitive, it's a very repeated system that I grab the stalk the same way every time. That is the way I do it. I don't think about it. Yet, so there can be very specific associations about how you do something. And that doesn't require thinking. And yet I'm just pointing out that it can be very specific. Like I do
Yeah.
it like 99.9% of the time, I do it the same hand, same finger grip. I don't
Right.
change anything.
And I wonder if sometimes like we go through different stages where like first we're using kind of the green path where it's kind of more model based. Like when I think so in my car or most cars you have like different directions for the wind wipers for the wipers.
Right.
And like when I first started driving my car, I had to think about okay, which direction is that? For which things. Now it's much more automatic. And actually the more I think about it, the harder it is to do it correctly. Because I think that explicit model is so atrophied and it's more of a model-free linking of just like, oh, I want the state of
Right.
a
Right.
single
Right.
wipe. Just let whatever column has kind of made a course like a simple association deal with that. Don't try and invoke
Right.
that ancient learned model
Yeah.
that's kind of atrophied.
Right. Right. It's same idea. It's like the turning again. I'm just thinking about it. It's just similar to what you just said. When I turn, I imagine turning the car. And it's almost like I observed that I've moved the stalk. Oh, I'm turning the wheel. It's like it's more of an observation that are happening as opposed to me thinking about them happening. They just sort of happen. I'm turning. I do all these things at once, right? You might put the brake on, you put the blinker on, you start turning. That we reposition your hands, all this stuff and then it's almost like I observed it after the fact. I said, "Oh, I guess I did." As opposed to I have to turn the stock. It sort of happens. Um, it's similar with the wiper, right? It just sort of happens,
Yeah.
and then you can observe it and see what you did. It's kind of weird. So even though I might think like, "Oh, I'm aware that I did this turning stock," it more be I'm aware because I observed it after I did it. It feels like
Right.
that.